Welcome to Beast TV. Tonight, Beauty meets the Beast. The all-female Bigfoot research group recounts their encounters and discoveries with things that go bump in the night. So get you a fresh dip and buckle up. Larry Porst II, how you doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I finally got over my gallbladder, or my insurance company said I did, and I went back to work yesterday.
Oh, I wished I could go back to work.
I understand, but sometimes you just got to go with the card you dealt.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about this show that we've got tonight because we got four good friends, and I'm just going to let you start introducing them.
Well, we got a room full of ladies here. About 3 years ago, maybe a little less, they all got together and formed a group called Sisters of the Moon and started researching together. And Barbara, we're going to let you start off because if we don't just name one person, it gets kind of hectic. But Barbara, how did you start off in this before you met the other ladies?
Oh my goodness. I was old enough when the Patty stuff started coming out and big enough to understand what they were talking about, and that caught my interest. And then Legend of Boggy Creek came out, and that piqued my interest. And then it just was always in the back of my mind for years and years and years. And in 2001, I moved back out to Georgia for a short time, and my sister Sandy and I were living in the same little town. And she called me, and when she's telling me about this sound she's hearing at her house. So we're thinking, maybe we got Bigfoot. So we got interested in it and started looking on the internet. And at that time, there really wasn't a whole lot to look at, but it was enough for us to hear sounds to compare it to. And then in 2005, I bought a new home in Sumner, Texas. That's where I live. And I have started having things happen around my house. And it was just crazy things like these huge iron gates that we have, and we couldn't keep them locked. And then I found baby footprints. And I just started having things happen. House, I had that howl outside my bedroom window, and that just totally freaked me out because I wasn't expecting a Bigfoot out the side of my window. So I got on the internet and started looking for groups in my area. I was looking for someone around Northeast Texas where I live. And I found a group that was going to have an expedition in January. And I talked to them and said I'd like to come to this expedition and meet everybody. Well, it just so happened around Thanksgiving, they met a little bit earlier, and that's when I met Henry Edge. I met Henry that weekend at the lake. It's like 15 miles from my house. It was really close. And then in January, went on this outing by the lake again, and that's where I met Debbie. And Sandy, of course, is my baby sister, which we've known each other all our lives. So that's how it got started. I met the girls. We clicked. We formed our little band, and we've been hot after it ever since.
Right. Well, you mentioned Henry. Of course, Henry sent us a message that she's sick, so we hope that Henry gets to feeling better real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So Debbie, if you can unmute your mic, can you tell us how you started in this?
I'm glad you reminded me to unmute my mic. Well, I kind of grew up in it in a certain sense because unbeknownst to me, um, about 40 miles from where I grew up, we had a Bigfoot, a very popular Bigfoot, a very famous now Bigfoot. We just didn't know at the time that it was a Bigfoot. We called it the Fouke Monster. And so I grew up about 40 miles from Fouke, Arkansas, in a little bitty community that had 200 people in it. We were in the country. And one time when I was about 14 years old, my daddy and I were on the front porch putting up Christmas lights, and we heard just this god awful scream, howl, moan, growl, whatever you want to call it. It was sounded like a combination, really, of all three, and it scared the daylights out of me. And I asked my daddy, what was that? And he said, I don't know what that is. And so, just within a few seconds, I had just said, let's go inside. And within a few seconds, we heard it again, and it was closer. And that's what really started scaring me and worrying me, because it was getting closer. And I, I think I started crying, to be honest. And I told my daddy again, I said, let's go inside. And he said, you go in. And I said, no, I said, I'm not leaving you out here. You come inside. Let's go inside. And he said, go get my gun. Well, when he told me to go get his gun, that scared me even worse, because my daddy was a Vietnam veteran, World War II veteran, and a Korean War veteran. And I had never, ever seen my daddy scared or worried even. But when he told me to get his gun, I knew that he was worried about something. And so I know I was crying by this time. And it wasn't just a few seconds. We heard this third moan, growl, roar, whatever. Um, and it sounded like it was right to our left, which was our carport. Now, remember, I lived in the country. We had a security light, but it was in the back of our house, by our back door. The carport light wasn't on. All we had was the light coming off of these blue Christmas lights that we were hanging up. And so when I heard that third growl, he did too. And he was pushing me in the door. And so when I got in, I was crying. My mama wanted to know what was going on. I was in there making these sounds for her, roaring and growling. And Daddy comes back out with his gun. He goes back outside. And so I follow him all the way around the house. I'm inside looking in the windows, just following him, trying to see, make sure he was okay. But anyway, long story short, it wasn't, it was, I remember going to see the movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. I was just a little kid when we saw it. Of course, it didn't talk about it being a Bigfoot then either. And so what we heard that night, we really didn't think about a Bigfoot. We thought about the Fouke Monster, because we were downriver from Fouke, Arkansas. But it wasn't until I was about 28 years old and I had gotten a computer and was able to get on the internet, and I had heard about Bigfoot at this time. So I was looking things up on the internet and looking at the sounds, listening to the sounds of Bigfoot, and I heard exactly what we had heard that night. So the next time I saw my daddy, I told him I wanted to play something for him, and I pulled it up on his computer and played it, and I said, does that sound familiar to you? Have you ever heard this before? And he said, you know damn good and well I have. And I said, really? I said, do you know what it is? He said, well, I've always suspected what it is. And I said, well, what do you think it is? He said, well, tell me what you just played. And I grinned and I said, that's a Bigfoot. He said, that's what I always wondered about. That's what I thought. And I was like, well, why didn't you ever tell me that? But ever since then, I mean, I've just had a fascination with finding out more about what we were so close to and had no clue at the time what it was. But that's what got me started in my interest in Bigfoot. And then Barbara told you how we all met. So I'm just very blessed that I found 4 other women that have just as a big enthusiasm with it as I do.
Patty, how about you? What you got involved in Bigfoot?
Well, I grew up, all my cousins, I have several boy cousins, like 5 boy cousins, and I was pretty much a tomboy all my life. I had two older sisters, and I was like 5 years younger than them. And I always wanted to hang with all the boys. That's just what I wanted to do. So I was in the woods with them all the time. And they were hunting and fishing and setting out trot lines, doing all that fun stuff. And I was always with them. And my oldest boy cousin, Billy, told us a story because they live very close to Fouke in Arkansas. And he was like terrified of this story that happened to him. He was parking with his girlfriend in the cemetery, and he kept seeing something that looked like it was peeking around the shed. And he said, I turned my lights on because I thought somebody was out there in the cemetery. And he said, I turned my lights on. And he said, when I did, it stood up and it was like a head taller than the shed. And he said, it terrified me. And he said, we drove off as fast as we could. And he said, I knew right then that what they were talking about in Fouke was true. He said, I saw one. And so he told that story to the family, and everybody just laughed and like, oh, yeah, whatever. Well, it stuck with me for some reason, and it just got me so interested in it all. And I was about in the 7th or 8th grade then, and it just stuck with me. And anything I could find about it, anything that I could read about it, I did, because I thought, okay, there's something out there. And ever since then, I've just, any little thing I can find or read, I do. You know, I read about it, and that's what got me interested. And then about 3 years ago, I started seeing these groups on Facebook that were, you know, Bigfoot groups, and I thought, man, I'd love to get in touch with somebody. So I started talking to them, and one of the guys in the group said, you need to call Debbie Jones. She doesn't live very far from you, and she Bigfoots. And I was like, okay. So I befriended her on Facebook, and we started talking, and that was how we met. And we started going, you know, on adventures together. She invited me, and that's how I met everybody. And that was about 3 years ago.
That's pretty cool. You know, that's how Mark Neville got started in Bigfoot. He was out parking and had one looking at him. Ain't that right, Mark?
Is that the lie we're going to tell, Larry?
No. We'll not
Was
go
he
with
parking
that.
with a Bigfoot?
He may have been. Sandy, I hope your story can top the parking story.
Well, I've got one my brother told me, and he's dead serious about it. He always has the same story, and they say you don't remember a lie, and his story always holds true every time he tells it. But this is one of the things as a small child that got me perked up with it. Is he had a girl out at the cemetery of all places parking, and believe it or not, this was on an island off the coast of Georgia. It was on an island called St. Simon's Island. Is that right, Barbara?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. It was on
Well,
St. Simon's.
He had the girl sitting up next to him. You know, it was probably in the upper 60s, I'm thinking.
This is a PG rated show, Sandy.
I know. We're going to keep it PG. But he said that they were sitting there in the car, and a cat actually jumped up on the hood of the car. And he said he was looking at the cat, and the girl he was with was looking at the cat. And he said a hairy arm and hand snatched that cat off that car.
Wow.
And, yeah, and he says, I ain't never backed up a car so fast in my life. Well, on top of that, I was hearing howls in the back of my yard in Georgia. And that's where Barbara said, you know, she and I was interested in it in South Georgia. And my son, he was out on the back patio one night letting our little puppies out. And I started to go out the door, and he and my two puppies, and if dogs are scared, you need to take notice. They usually think they're mighty dogs. The dogs were trying to come in on, ahead of him. And he said, Mom, I just heard the most horrific howl. He said it sounded like it was right behind our little shed, which was just a few feet from our house. And it really perked my interest even more. we got on the I got on the computer a couple of days later and started pulling up sounds of cats, cougars. We do have, they say there's no panthers around here, but there is. Panther sounds. I mean, anything, fox, anything I could think of. We were pulling up the sounds. He said, "No, Mama, that wasn't it. No, Mama, that wasn't it." Well, for kicks and giggles, I pulled up a Bigfoot howl. And as soon as I played it, and he didn't know what I clicked on, he said, "Mama, that's what I heard." I went, "Okay, that's interesting." but I met Debbie and everybody through my sister. My first outing was with Barbara and Henry, who's not with us tonight, and I was petrified just a tiny tad. But I kept coming back. Barbara shaking her head. She knows that's a lie. I was petrified. Petrified. But
We've seen the video.
there's something about that adrenaline rush. I love it and I'm hooked on it. I just have to keep going out now.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah,
Debbie,
and that's it.
Debbie, let me ask you about the first time that y'all ladies camped out together. Tell me what that experience was like and how y'all meshed together.
Well, we meshed really well. I mean, the first time we ever camped out together um, was before we actually formed the group, and we were on that expedition and meshed so well that we decided we wanted to go out more. But the first time we officially went out as a group, I would say, we got really, really lucky. Um, we were actually looking for a place to set up camp, and it was me and Patty and another, and we were backing into this location to turn around. And when we were back in, I looked over. I was in the back seat and of a pickup truck, and I looked over my shoulder just to make sure we weren't going to hit anything. And when I did, I saw some bones back there. It looked like, a rib cage and everything. And I just mentioned something about it. I said, "Y'all, there's some bones back here, and it looks like a whole body almost." And so we stopped. I remember Patty got out and went back there to it, and then we decided just dog it out. And when we walked back there, we realized that it wasn't just one whole set of bones, a whole body of bones. There were about 5 or 6 just scattered around from what we could see. And our first thought was poachers. I mean, we were way back there. We were probably, I know it takes us about 35 minutes, maybe more, to get down this road off of the main road. And we were way out there. And so it'd be a good location for poachers to get rid of the bodies, I suppose. But when we started walking around and looking, there was a mound and we could walk around that. And we just kept walking and went back into where the woods actually started, because this was out closer to the road. And we knew that poachers really wouldn't throw it out that close to the road, I would think. But and when I say a road, it was a dirt road that got us back to where we were. So when we went back into where the woods actually started, we started seeing bones just everywhere. Some were still pretty much, I would say, full bodies, minus the legs, um, rib cages, heads still attached, the spinal column, the tailbones. Um, Several still had antlers on them. And so we started thinking, okay, poachers wouldn't leave this many antlers.
Yeah.
And it was really strange. And it was approximately, we guesstimated, and a couple of people we've taken out since then, y'all included. I know Larry Porch's been out there. Probably about 3 acres worth minimum. And
Yeah.
y'all, it was just like you couldn't take 10 steps and there'd be more bones, no matter what direction you went in. There were bones everywhere. So our curiosity was definitely aroused. And so we had a friend of ours, Michael Humphreys. He ended up coming out there when we were there the next day we camped, of course, out there. We didn't camp in that exact location, but we were probably, if we cut through the woods, we weren't 5 minutes from that location. And during that night, actually, I went to sleep, and Pat, it was January, and it was freezing, and it was, I think it was 15,
16
16,
degrees.
16 degrees out there.
I
And
know I was frozen.
yeah, Patty, bless her heart, she had borrowed, at the time, she had borrowed one of those mummy sleeping bags. And so she had her head tied up. All you could see was her head. She looked like she was in a little cocoon. It was so funny. And she was in the tent with me. And then another one of the girls we were with, Carrie, was in a tent next to ours, and we were in an L shape. And then we had one of the canopies on top of it, or, out in front of us. And my cooler was on the outside of the tent, just right where my head was. And that first night, like I said, I went to sleep, but Patty couldn't sleep. She was frozen solid. Even though we had a little Mr. Buddy going, the canisters kept freezing up on the Mr. Buddy, the little propane canisters. And so we were having to change those out. But we had a visitor that night, and Patty was the one awake and heard it all. So, Patty, why don't you tell about that?
Well, it was my first real experience going camping, looking for anything. And so I was a novice. And so I did bring my little one sleeping bag that wrapped up like a little papoose. And Debbie was over here under 10 blankets, and we were laughing because I was like, she's under 10 blankets. I'm in this one little sleeping bag.
Hey, I'm
But
prepared.
hey, and that was good, but it was very cold. It was so much colder than it was supposed to have been. So about 2 o'clock, the Mr. Buddy went off. The tank was empty, and I sat there and I thought, oh Lord, I got to get Debbie's keys and go find another tank because I'm frozen. My feet were frozen, my hands were frozen. I could barely move. So I'm sitting there contemplating this, and I hear something outside in the trash, and I thought, oh, I bet it's raccoons. We'd had chili for supper. That I brought chili, and of course we had thrown everything in the trash. There was kind of a big barrel full of trash, and so I'm just listening, and I said, oh, I bet it's raccoons. So I'm sitting there listening, and I hear all of a sudden something walking, and you could tell that it was something on 2 feet because you could hear it walking. And I was laying there thinking, okay, that would not be raccoons, but I could see the fire. The fire was still going, and everybody else was asleep. I could hear snoring from every direction. And I thought, okay, I'm the only one awake, and I'm frozen like a popsicle. But I was scared. This was my first encounter, and I was scared to death to move or make a noise. And I kept reaching over here trying to grab Debbie. I was like trying to grab her, and she was dead asleep. So I just sit there and I listened very quietly, and I heard it walking. Well, whatever it was walked right up to the tent where the ice chest was. And I will never forget this sound as long as I live, but it breathed 4 different deep guttural breaths, and the only thing I could compare it to was where we used to keep our horse. There were buffalo, and when they breathed, they made that very deep kind of sound, and I heard that, and it was probably 3 feet in front of you, and I just knew something was there, and I was over here trying to grab Debbie, and I was like, ah. So I just listened, and I was frozen because I thought, you're out here to find this, and you're frozen. You're scared to death. Well, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I thought, this is ridiculous. But if you move, it will hear you. So then it walked back to the trash again, and I heard, when you pick up a Coke can and a Coke, you squeeze it, it kind of, that metal sound, it goes like, kind of that metal sound. Well, I heard it squeezing Coke cans, and I thought, that is all. So I just lay there very quietly until I heard nothing else. because I was afraid to make any sounds or movement. I was terrified. So I probably laid there 45 minutes to an hour, and then I heard two very long howls from across the lake, and they were like this very deep, melancholy, long howls. And I thought, oh my God. And I finally just reached over there and grabbed Debbie, and I said, Debbie, wake up. And she jumped up and said, what? And I was just like, I couldn't shut up. I was just like, I was so excited, you know. And that was my first experience on the first time out. And so, of course, for me, that was like, wow, you know.
Are you saying you get wound up when you get excited?
Do what?
Are you saying you get wound up when you get
I
excited?
did get very wound up because my heart was pounding through my chest. And I thought, oh my God, this is what you're out here for. Why are you scared? But, you know, it was my first time.
So what happened after that, Debbie?
Well, that next day, Patty told us all about everything that had happened, which really honestly creeped me out because she was telling me how it was just right there on the other side of the tent, right by my head, and how it was so, the breathing, she said it had this congested sound to the breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really creepy thinking about it. But the next day, we had talked to Michael Humphreys.
Oh, shit.
And he came out there the next day.
Are you kidding me?
And Patty, we can hear you, darling. But anyway, so Michael Humphreys came out there the next day, him and his wife. And while he was out there, we were telling him about what we had found with all the bones and everything. And we took him down there, over there to it. And at first, when he saw the first few there at the entrance, what we call the entrance, he was thinking the same thing. But then when we walked back there to the back, where the 3 acres were, approximately, he was like, oh, wait, this is interesting. The more he walked around, the more interested he got. And of course, I'm talking about Michael Humphreys of Killing Bigfoot. He came out there, and so he sat there and visited with us for a long time, and then he left. And later that evening, the girls and I, we had chili. I think that was the night that we had actually, normally we don't ever leave any food out, no trash or anything. The night Patty was talking about, we did have canned drinks in that garbage can, but no food at that time. So the second night when we had chili, somebody did just inadvertently threw their empty chili bowl in that big old barrel that we had out there with the Coke cans and Dr. Pepper cans, and had left just a little bit of chili in there. And that was not too far from where our campfire was at. And on the opposite side of the campfire, on the opposite side of our camp from where our tents were, was this huge tree. And we had hung Patty's chimes up there. And they're the big chimes, with the big barrels. And I had stood up on a little footstool to get up. I'm the tallest one of the group. And so we hung those chimes probably 7 to 8 feet on the side, high up on the side of that tree. And so we went to bed that night. We had rigged up after Patty told us about what had come into camp, or, we didn't know what it was, but we had suspicion. But after she had told us that, we decided that we wanted to rig up something to where we could wake each other up easily without making any noises or moving around. And since Carrie was in a tent over by herself, she was sitting in the tent was in an L shape from my tent. She had pulled her truck back around behind our tent and made an angle. And the fire in front of our tents was reflecting between the spaces between our two tents and reflecting off of her big old chrome bumper and her chrome wheels that she had on her truck. So it was lighting up the back of our tent. And after we had laid there forever. We'd gone to sleep off and on, and we were woken up by noise, or at least I was. And I wasn't sure what it was. And it sounded like it was coming from Carrie's tent. And so finally, I just, in my quietest, loudest voice, I whispered and I said, Carrie. And she said, shit, what? And I said, is that you? She said, yes, but something's here. And anyway, we just got real quiet, and we kind of suspected that something was there because we had been hearing that. And the longer we laid there, the more movement we started seeing. And it looked as though there were two, because I remember pointing to Patty. I had set up on the side of my bed, and I had pointed to Patty towards the back corner, and then I pointed towards the front of our tent. And that's where we could see the shadows and where we could hear the motion and movement. And so finally, I decided I was going to try to be brave, which I'm really surprised at myself. I was completely surprised that night because I had never looked out of a tent before, thinking there could be a Bigfoot or something out there. And that's my worst fear. I'm more scared of something looking back at me. And but I had left the flaps, the little top corners of the tent, the doors folded down to where I could peek out if I wanted to. And so I very easily and quietly, as quiet as I could, went over there to that door. Thank goodness it was a small tent. I didn't have far to go. And I worked my way to where I could stand up a little bit. The whole time I was praying, please don't freak out. Please don't freak out. Please don't freak out. And I looked out of the front of the tent and I saw absolutely nothing. I could see the fire going. We still had, flames. We had good flames. It wasn't long after we'd gone to bed that this all started. I looked to my right. By that time, Henry had come in. She's notorious for showing up in the middle of the night. We won't know if she's there sometimes, but she was over in her vehicle and no movement over there. I looked to my left and I could see the right hand side of Carrie's tent. I could see the flap. There was absolutely no wind at all, thank goodness, because we would have been popsicles. But I looked back out over the fire, and when I did, I hadn't even looked at the tree and the chimes, but as soon as I looked over the fire, something hit those chimes. And it was just solid black behind them. I couldn't see anything past that tree. It was complete blackness. Now, the day before, we had put together a lot of glow sticks to where they made the little necklaces. We had 14 necklaces total, and we had hung them on the tree line that was way back behind where those chimes were. Because, it was solid black. And we wanted to be able to see while we were sitting around the fire if there was movement back there. And with it being as dark as it was, there was no way to tell. So we put those chimes as high up as we could get them. And again, I was the one that got to reach up there and put them up where I could. And we would put them on the smallest limbs in case, we didn't want a raccoon getting up there and freaking us out. And so if it had gotten on that limb, it would have fallen and broken. But anyway, I couldn't even see those glow sticks or those glow necklaces. I could see the tree and the chimes it was on. And when whatever it was hit those chimes, it's so hard to explain without me trying to demonstrate it. But if you can imagine chimes hanging straight down to the side of the tree, and something hit it with such force that those chimes went straight up and back down. But it hit with so much force, they went straight up. But y'all, it was so weird because anybody that's seen wind chimes move in the least bit, and they don't move even that much when there's a lot of wind. But when they do move, that ball that hangs down in the center, if they go up any at all, those chimes are going to fall down around the ball and then go back down. Well, they didn't. What I was seeing is when those chimes went up, every tube was completely in place as if it was hanging straight down. It was the strangest thing. And I was standing there, I'm sure, with my eyes just as big as could be, because they went up and down and stopped at the tree. They didn't swing backwards like they should have after the force they had just been hit with. I mean,
Right.
they were hit so hard, they should have propelled themselves backwards and then gone back out again and slowly slowed down, like normal. But they didn't. They did a set of 5 where they went straight up and back down, stopped at that tree like something was stopping those chimes where they couldn't swing backwards, went straight back up and back down. And with each time that it was going, it was making a sound kind of like brum, bum, brum, bum, brum, bum. And you could hear it like it was something was stopping it, but I couldn't see anything stopping it. And so it did like 5 sets, and then it would stop for just a second or two, and then do it again 5 more times, stop for a second or two, and then it did it again 5 more times and stop. And then they just completely stopped. And Patty, I looked over at Patty out of the corner of my eye, and she had this look on her face like, what is that? What's going on? And I was trying to do with my fingers in front of me what was happening. And I was trying not to move too much because I knew we had that, Mr. Buddy heater going, and I was creating a shadow on the outside of the tents just like they had been when they were moving around the tent. But anyway, the next morning when we woke up, Henry was there. She had had her parabolic on her ears. She had the mic on the outside of her vehicle and then her headphones on, and it was recording. It recorded the entire night, luckily. And I went out there immediately, came straight out of the tent, went over there, tried to recreate every possible way I could think of to where those chimes were straight out, being held in place. I couldn't do it. It was just, I'm still scratching my head over it, honestly. And at the same time, and we messed with the chimes forever. We went out to get the glow sticks, and there were only 9 glow sticks or necklaces. We looked all over the ground, couldn't find any. So 5 were gone, 5 glow necklaces. And I think Patty found later that day, we looked all over. We found 2 places that looked like they were possible prints. We cast those. Later that day, Patty noticed the bowl that had been left in that little can, and the chili, something had just licked that bowl just straight down the center and had spit out the beans. And those
Yeah.
beans were right over there by those chimes. It was like a little pile of beans.
That's right.
Yeah.
They don't like beans, that's for sure.
But it was a head scratcher. And later on, after Henry put the recording on Audacity and was listening, you could hear that as the movement outside of our tent started, you could hear a whistle, a single monotone whistle, and then the movement started. And then one of us rolled over or something. So they evidently had moved in before we ever woke up. And when it heard us move, you can hear a grunt, just a low, ugh, almost like, like stop. I don't know. That's just what we figured it is. Who knows? And then, of course, you can hear the whole series of the chimes happening. And then later on, after we calmed down and laid back down and tried to go to sleep, a long time afterwards, you can hear another monotone whistle. And nothing else happened after that. I do want to fast forward to about 2 weeks later. We came back out. This time Patty wasn't with us. I think Barbara was. Barbara, is that right?
Yes, yes, I was
Okay.
there at the next trip.
Okay. Henry came out there. We were walking around the killing field because this was Barbara's first time to get to see it. And it was like half of the bone had disappeared. we went all over that place kicking leaves and stuff, and we must have said a million times, where are all the bones? We were dumbfounded. 2 weeks time, they're not going to just disintegrate that fast.
No.
And we had found, I want to back up and say that we had found that first time there were the necks that had the heads attached. You could see the sinew or whatever, that it was twisted. And so some of the necks have been twisted. Yeah, the
Remember,
legs.
the legs are broken.
Yeah, the legs have been broken. Matter of fact, I have one sitting over there on my shelf, one of the broken leg bones. It has teeth marks inside of it, or
Did
like
it?
scrape.
Let me ask this: did it look like the marrow had been eaten out of it?
There wasn't any in this one particular one. Now, on a lot of the other ones, you could see traces of marrow, but most of it was gone.
Uh huh.
On this one that has teeth marks in it, it had been scraped out. I didn't see any around where it was. I mean, it was literally broken in half.
Right.
And but we kicked around. We just couldn't figure out where all the bones were. And as we were going to leave that place to go back to camp, Henry came up on this tree, two trees, maybe about that big around the tree trunks, and they had been crossed over each other. One of them was a cedar, and the other one, it didn't have many leaves on it since it was January. And she just commented how she said, this would make a good blind. And we looked at it, and yeah, we took pictures of it. And so we're back in camp, and later that night, we had left all of the firewood out there from 2 weeks earlier when we had been out there. And Barbara and I were in camp, and I had said something to Barbara. She was by the tree, and it was the tree, of course, that had originally had the chimes on it. And I do want to mention that underneath the chimes, 2 weeks earlier, we had a big wooden pallet that was leaned up against the tree. And so I had said something to Barbara. I said, why don't you get some of that wood off of that pallet? And so she pulled the pallet back, was going to rip some of the wood off. And when she pulled the pallet away from the tree, out rolled those 5 missing glow necklaces. And that was awesome. I mean, I was like, oh my God. I said, that's the 5 necklaces that are missing. And somehow those 5 necklaces had managed to be hidden under that pallet, directly under those chimes. So I don't know what put them there, but they were there. And then 3 weeks later, we went back out to the place. Now, mind you, we heard howls most every time we were out there. Some seemed pretty far off, some seemed closer. But the third time we went out was 3 weeks after that second time. And a friend of Henry's that I had not met until then, D.W. Lee, who is head of the MABRC, she had asked him to come out and look at the place and give us his opinion. And he had the same impression. He was thinking, oh, there's probably poachers. And when he got out there, he changed his opinion. There were also, we noticed too, I forgot about this, there were these big holes, just long, I don't know. At first we had thought maybe they had been where trees had been, and trees had fallen, and they had hollowed out the holes. But we started noticing that there was, something strange about them. They were all almost exactly the same size. We could lay down in them. If you laid down in them, you were just low enough to where you wouldn't be seen.
Right.
It was very interesting. I believe there was 8 of those. And the lay of the land was that we were up on a hill. And if you went down this side, it went down to the river. The river actually circled all the way around it. So it was an actual inlet, and there was water all the way around it. But the particular side that these indentions, holes, whatever, hiding places, who knows, um, where they were was on the side that had a steep incline down to the river. Not a real steep incline, but more so than the other side. But we walked around, showed DW. Now that third week, almost even more bones were gone. And we were just beside ourselves. We couldn't imagine how they would just disappear like that. And as we're walking out towards the front, I said, "Oh, DW, I want to show you this thing we're calling a blind." It was interesting. And, now mind you, we had been saying again, where are all the dang bones? We just could not imagine. And Carrie and I, and Henry and Barbara had been out there earlier that morning before DW ever got there. And we were, saying, where are all the bones? Because there were even more bones gone. And so 2 hours later, when we went out there with DW, we walk over to the blind, what we call the blind. And as I step up to it, there underneath the blind was bones that had not been there 2 hours earlier. They were
Wow.
just not stacked up, but there were several bones laying there. And I had this look on my face like, holy cow. I looked at Terry and told her to come up there, and I said, these were not here when we were there earlier. And she said, no. And luckily we had taken pictures. We know they weren't there. And so that was kind of wild, because it was like, okay, they were listening. They heard us, and they were like, here you go. You want some bones? Here's you some bones. It was crazy. And so I tied a recorder to the cedar tree and left it there all night. And before we left, I pointed out to DW how each of those trees that crisscrossed had two snaps on them, both of them, two snaps. And they weren't broken all the way in two. They were just snapped to where they could bend just a little bit. And I even pointed that out to DW. I said, notice how they're not broken all the way in two. So we left. And then the next morning was the day we were going to leave to go home. And Carrie and I went back down there to the blind to get my recorder. And when we got there, all four of those snaps had been broken in two.
Wow.
And yeah, that's what I said. And so I did. I listened to the recorder on my way out of there because, like I said, it took so long to get out of where we were at. And you could hear us from the day before. We had driven the cars over to that area. And then after we were getting ready to leave, we stood there for probably 15 minutes just talking to DW. He had his grandson with him, and we were just all talking. And we got back in the cars, and he went home, and we went back to camp. And as soon as you hear our car starting and drive off, you can hear a tree knock. And then just a few seconds later, you can hear another tree knock. And then that was it. Didn't hear anything else.
Larry?
That's a pretty interesting account. What's wrong, Mark?
Well, I was going to say, do we have any questions?
We don't have time for questions. We got 3 more stories to get through. And we don't need to hear about what type of wood was burning in the fire.
Well, it was important to say that we were going to get the wood off of that pallet.
Oh, okay.
You're a good thing I like you, Larry.
I know. Good job.
I know.
Very good.
Excuse me for a minute.
Crash.
So from there, then y'all went on and had an outing that y'all recorded some real good vocals. Who all was at that outing, Debbie, while you're getting all your stuff together there? Or any of the other ladies, if you were there, go ahead and join in.
Well, I wasn't there the night that they had the Charlie's Angels action. I didn't get there until the next morning.
All right.
Yes. And I got my ears full when I got there.
I'm sorry, y'all. I knocked my light off.
Well,
I get excited when I'm talking about it too.
let's get into the gibberish story so everybody
Okay.
can hear it.
Okay. I'll try not to be as long. I mean, it was a lot more stuff happened that night. It was the killing field, what we called the killing field. That was in January 2017. And what happened at the place we call Tribulation Bay, where we had the all night activity and recorded the gibberish, that was in September of 2017. So 2017 was a stellar year.
Yes,
But
it was.
so again, it was Carrie and I, and we were in a totally different location than the killing field, but it was still Oklahoma. And we'd gotten there and we're setting up the tent, and she had a really big tent. It was her tent, and it was still daylight a little bit, but it was starting to get dark. And so we were setting up the tent, and to our right was more of the wood line and heavily wooded. And we started hearing what sounded like moans or deep, low growls. It was very different. We'd never heard this before. It sounded like moans, honestly. And we always try not to let it, whatever's out there, we try not to let them know we hear something. Um, it was hard not to look over there, but we'd look for just a second and then look away. And we heard them several times. And then they began to change from a moan and evolve into different animal sounds. One would evolve into a chicken. Another time it moaned and then turned into a cow. Now we knew where we were at, which this was the first time that we had ever been there. Henry had gone out and scouted the location and had sent us 5 different places, pictures and stuff, and asked us to pick which one. And she had told us that she just had a creepy feeling at this one, and we were like, that's the one. Creepy
That's
is
always
good.
right the way to go. We feel the creepy feeling.
Yeah. And so that's where we had picked. And so she had dropped a pin, and that's how we found our way there. And the pin ended, and the road kept going a little ways. And so we went on down. But so going in, we could tell that there was nothing but woods around. We were approximately 3 or 4 miles from the closest house. And there were definitely no cows in those woods. And there were no chickens in those woods that we saw going in. But then another time when it would moan, it turned into what sounded like a bear. And I know that there are bears out there somewhere. And I didn't want to take a chance that that was a bear that I'd actually heard. I knew the others weren't cows or chickens, but my luck, that would be a bear. I would dismiss it, and then the bear would eat me. And so I said, let's go get us a bear spray. And so I got my recorder out finally because we had set up the tent. We had started setting up the tent as soon as we got there. We didn't even think about getting recorders out, which now we do. We set them out as soon as we get there. But so I got my recorder out, turned it on. We left and drove 40 miles to the nearest town. And they didn't have any bear spray. Went back to camp. When we got back to camp, we got our chairs out, sat around the campfire, and I had my gun in my cup holder, so did Carrie, and then we had recorders in the other cup holder. By that time, of course, it was dark, and I didn't want to go set the recorders out. Imagine that. But so we just kept them right there with us that first, that night. And almost as soon as we sat down, it started back up. And we were hearing howls and whoops, the most perfect whoops I'd ever heard in my life. One came from in front of us, and then one answered from back over our left shoulder. I remember going, I can't freaking believe this. I was so excited. It was like an adrenaline rush, and could hear howls far off. Sometimes they'd be closer. Could hear tree breaks, snaps. We heard strange stuff that we definitely had never heard before. We were hearing what sounded like a mechanical saw, except it was coming from right there in the wood line. And we knew there was no electricity. And we heard that several times throughout the night. And then we also heard from the same location what sounded like a huge heavy duty truck, like a big jacked up truck, or it was loud, and it sounded like a truck motor. And sometimes it would sound like it was shifting down, if that makes sense. We heard that several times throughout the night, and that really baffled us. We contemplated several different things, but nothing made sense with that. That went on for several hours, and then finally we decided we'd go to bed. Now, Henry was supposed to be coming that night. Like I said, we don't know when she's going to show up, and so we went ahead and went to bed. And Carrie had 2 cots. I was against the front wall, and I was messing with my cot. She lay down and closed her eyes, and I thought she'd gone right to sleep. And while I was still messing with the cot, from directly in front of me, I heard what sounded like a cough. It was just like, to me, it sounded like a human cough. And so I remember I looked at Carrie and I said, Henry's here. And I unzipped my window and I looked out, and the fire was still going, so we could still see a little bit, but there was no Henry. Our cars were further on the other side. It wasn't right up to our tents, but it was closer out to where this little dirt road was. And I couldn't see Henry's vehicle. So I zipped the window back up, and I looked at Carrie and I said, that wasn't Henry. And it wasn't a second later, we heard the cough again, but this time it was coming from my corner, what I would say the corner of my tent on out that angle. So I knew it had moved. So I unzipped my tent again, and I had my spotlight right there, and I shined my light out the window, and I hollered, Henry Edge. And there was no Henry. So I zipped it back up really quick, and now I'm spooked. The other stuff that we had been encountering earlier in the night didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I was excited about that, but now I'm scared because I'm beginning to think this is a human, because it sounded like a human cough. And that's what I told Carrie. I said, that was a human cough. And so she sat up on the bed because she had not heard it. So she sat up for a second on the side of her bed, and I stood in the middle of the tent. And then we heard it again, or I heard it again. She heard it this time, and it was to my right. And then we heard it another time, and it was back at the angle. And so she had gotten up for a second and had stood in the middle with me. And I said, do you think it's human? And she said, if it is, they had to walk a long ways in, because we didn't hear, we had heard what sounded like the truck motor, but that was coming from the woods. And that had been probably 3 hours earlier. And we never heard anything else. And so now it's starting to circle around us. She had sat down on the side of her bed, and when we started hearing it behind us coughing, it did a total of 8 coughs, and it had circled the tent. But by the time it got over to her side of the tent where her cot was, she had sat down on it, and it pushed her cot. And so she got back up really quick. And so she's back in the middle of the tent with me. And I was a little scared then. I was worried that this was humans out there. And we kept talking about all of the things we had heard earlier that we knew weren't humans. And so I said, I've got to know. I couldn't dismiss this. I had to know if it was humans. And so we got our guns, and we got our key fobs for our cars. And I said, let's stand at your door. Because she had one of those doors that's on a little hinge type thing, and it swings. And we had just had it Velcroed. It has the Velcro in it. We didn't even have it zipped. And I said, let's stand in the doorway side by side and wait. And when we hear another sound, we'll come out. We'll hit our key fobs. We'll come out. And those lights on our cars and vehicles will light up, and hopefully we can catch something as it's running. And anyway, so that's what we did. We stood there and waited until we heard something. And when we did, we came out of there like Charlie's Angels, We kind of get tickled thinking about it now. I don't know what in the world we would have done actually if we'd have seen something. But there was nothing out there. We walked around, tried to look around, didn't see anything. Went back in the tent. She laid down on her cot after a little while, and then I laid down on mine, and it started back up. I ended up getting back up in the middle of the tent, and it wasn't coughs anymore. This time now it's breaks, and you could hear whoops and screams off in the distance. Not the whoops and screams weren't real close to us. Um, I was standing up in the middle of the tent, and it just activity picked up and got very active again to where I was like, let's go back out there. Let's do it again. And so we stood in the doorway, waited for a sound, went back out with the key fobs, and this time we started our vehicles. That way the lights would stay on. And didn't see anything. I mean, we went out pretty quick, hoping to catch something. And how it got gone that fast, we didn't think it was possible, but we found out it was. There was nothing out there. And so we had to get in our vehicles this time to kill the motors, and went back in the tent. And every time we were in the tent and quieted down, that's after 5 or 10 minutes of us being quiet, not talking, it would start up again. And it just continued on back and forth. And at one point, we were sitting on the floor in the center of the tent, and it was either dragging its fingers or a branch or something along the backhand side of our tent. And I remember we sat and we could hear it and see it, and it would move along the back of the tent, and then we turned this way as it went down. Well, we had this little area off the back of the tent that was what we call the potty area, but it was a closet. It's built into the tent, and we had a potty in there, and it hesitated at that area. And so we're both sit looking back over our shoulders at that area, and while we were turned looking back there, something hit the front right corner of the tent where my cot was, really hard and really loud, and the whole side of that tent was just like a wave, going up and down, and scared the crap out of us. And that stopped after a little bit, and the noise stopped after a little bit, and I'd get back up in the bed, she'd get up in the bed, and then as soon as we think, okay, it's quiet, it'd start back up again. We'd get back in the middle of the tent, and this went on back and forth for a long time. A second time we were in the floor, I happened to be looking in that direction because I could hear something. We had a tree right there in that corner, and I had set my recorder right by that tree on the ground. And so I was excited because whatever I was hearing, I knew that recorder was picking it up. And I had my other recorder on the left-hand side. I was like, this is as good as it's going to get. I'm going to have to put them close to the tent because I wasn't going to go out in the woods and put them out there like I normally do. And so I was excited knowing that my recorders were there. And when something was moving over there, I was looking, and that's what I was thinking of at that time, is this is picking it up. This is catching all of this. And about that time, while I'm looking, it hit that corner again. And this time I saw it hit, and you could see that the hand or whatever it used, it came in about that far, and it almost hit the X that the cot made. And it was just so loud. It scared the crap out of us when it hit it. But finally, I remember it was about 3-something in the morning, and I had gotten back up on my cot and was laying there, and I thought, okay, it's been quiet for a little bit now. It'd been at least 15 minutes of quiet, and I thought it's going to calm down. And while I was laying there, I still can't believe this happened, y'all. I get excited thinking about it. From what sounded like it was at the tree line, now it might, I don't know where it was at, of course, but you could hear 2 distinct voices, tones of voices, just like if, all of us, when we talk, we all sound different. Well, that's what this was. It was 2 different voices, and it was just gibberish. One of them was like, blah, 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 just real short, and then the other one answered back and real short. But then almost immediately after those two had said whatever they said to each other, closer in my head, I had envisioned it that they were out closer to the tree line, and then this third being had come in between us, and this one sounded like it was getting on to them, and it was just very matter of factly, and I just figured it was saying, y'all leave these women alone and get your butts back home. But as soon as it got through saying whatever it said, you could start, I heard what sounded like wood popping, snapping, and then you could hear it splintering, and then it just came crashing down. And I mean, we could feel it. And I looked at Carrie, and she had her back to me. She was rolled over facing that sound, and I came up out of my cot and hit her just to get her. I mean, I wanted to make sure she was awake, and she was, and she had heard it all, and it just took my breath away. It was amazing. And we sat there and talked for about it, and it was completely quiet after that. I guess that ended it all for that night. And so it was about 4 o'clock when all that happened, because I had looked at my phone to see what time it was. I tried to mark things, and it was 3:20 when all of the movement had started back up. And so about a little after 4, it was over and done with, and went back to sleep. 6:30 in the next morning, I woke up to sounds. Didn't know it was 6:30 until I opened my eyes and saw the daylight. And I remember I had thought, "Oh crap, are you serious? They're back." But then when I realized it was daylight, I thought, "Okay." And so I looked out the window, and it was Henry, and she was messing around in her vehicle. And so I hightailed it out of that tent. I said, "Where have you been? You missed it all." And she said, "Hold on, hold on." So she's telling me that when she pulled in, she said, I think it was somewhere around 4 o'clock, and she had pulled just a little ways past everything, and her headlights had hit something, she said, running from my side of the tent. There was a ridge line, and she caught the calf part, what looked like the calf part of a leg. She said, I don't know. This is what it looked like. And she turned like she was running, had her legs stuck back in the air, and she said, this is the only part I could see, but it looked like something was running away from your tent. And then I proceeded on to tell her about the whole night, and she said, right after I got here, I heard a tree fall. And so she had evidently pulled in right before that tree got pushed to the ground or whatever. And so we don't know, of course, but we think that maybe you have to go really slow down this road because there's huge boulders and rocks. And we think maybe this third one had heard her coming and had come to tell those other two, there's somebody coming, you need to get out of here. And anyway, that was the night that we recorded the gibberish and all of that, because my recorders had been out.
That's going to be a whole show for us. Whenever our friend Carrie Arnold sends you that laptop, and we're going to spend a whole show listening to that recording and looking at the spectrogram.
Okay,
So
sounds good.
that means we're not going to play it now, right?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Well, then let's go on to the next part. I know that Barbara and Sandy went on to camp somewhere, and they used that gibberish while they were camping. Can one of y'all tell the story about that?
Well, I'll try if you can hear me good enough.
We can hear you. Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. It was October 2018. Sandy flew in from Georgia, and we went to Jefferson for the Bigfoot conference. And Debbie had been out and scouted and found a really good spot that she thought, hey, this would be a good place for y'all to camp. We wouldn't be around anybody. We'd be right by ourselves. So we go down to this area, and we set up our camp, and then we take off and go to the conference. And we probably come back out into the woods around 11 p.m. And it had just been raining and raining. It was kind of a miserable afternoon. I mean, evening and night, because it just rained. And we sat there. We had our stuff set up, but we had to get a fire started. We got the fire started, and I grabbed my phone, and our niece Stephanie was with us on this trip, and I asked her. I said, "Hey, you want to hear Bigfoot talking?" Yeah. So I got out my phone and I played this recording of the gibberish. And just as soon as I stopped playing it, I played it immediately again. But when it finished, I mean, just in a mega instant, there were three loud boom, 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 just right behind us in the woods. And after those booms, it's still kind of scary. You can hear the movement and you can feel the movement coming out of the woods at us. And Sandy and I turn and look at each other like, you know, I don't know what's fixing to happen to us, but something's coming. But when they got to the woods, something went to each side of the woods tent. And as it went past our tent, just shook all the trees, and they were full of water and just doused us with water. But then they curved off and went in each direction out into the woods, and we weren't bothered anymore. So we kind of thinking that they understood this language that we picked up in Oklahoma, and it's telling them, as far as we're thinking, hey, stop, knock this nonsense off and get out of here, because that's exactly what they did. As soon as the booms happened, they came up, they left, and we had no more activity that night. It was just rain.
Sandy, what did you think whenever this was going on? Did you want Barbara to play that some more?
I had no desire for her to play it again. Absolutely not. I remember as soon as I thought it sounded like multiple trees falling at once. But actually, the next morning we got up, and where we were camping, there was a tree already down there, but there were no more trees. And it's like she said, as soon as she played it, boom, 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 and I could see the movement, but the woods was so thick you couldn't see what was tearing by you, but on each side. So I think we at least had two there. Yeah. And Barbara looked at me and I looked at her, and I was thinking, I'm about to die tonight. But, I'm still here. This is it. This is how I die, right here. But fortunately, whatever that gibberish, and I'm with Barbara, that's all we could talk about for probably the next hour or two. Is that gibberish means something. It means get your butt home. You don't need to mess with them people. We don't know really, but that's what we're thinking maybe. Because when Debbie and them heard the same gibberish, it's like all their activities stopped as well. So that's what I'm thinking, but I'm by no means, an expert, but really who is. We can all just assume that we know, and it's kind of crazy. The more I learn, the more questions I have. But
True.
And yeah, it was an interesting place. And then the next night we went back after the conference, and they run our butts out of there. They said we couldn't camp there no more. So.
Yeah.
Debbie has a history of that.
Yes, she does.
She don't seem to check. She don't check any regulations or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we want to camp where nobody's at, so.
And there's a reason why they're not there.
Evidently.
Yeah, we want to be as far away from anybody as we can.
Yeah, we don't really like camping in campgrounds.
Right.
No.
So that was pretty much all the activity y'all had, was whenever y'all played that gibberish, it run them off pretty much.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
I had my recorder in my tent that I had left on while we were at the conference. And just a bit of advice, when you come back to camp, do not turn your recorder off, because I was thinking I'm just not going to hear anything on this recorder but rain. I'm going to be listening to hours and hours and hours of rain. So I reached in there and I turned it off, and then of course that's when it just went crazy. but I did listen to what I had on the recorder, and while we were gone, you could hear the constant rain, but it would also sound like something would run by and slap our tent.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they were testing out to see if we were in there. They weren't hearing any snoring, and that's a sure sign that we're asleep. But I heard that. But as far as when the crashes came, I didn't have my recorder on, and I kicked myself up a million times for turning it off.
Well,
That
that's how we learn.
I know, you're right. And my gun was in there, the recorder and the gun inside the tent. But we
So
was safe.
after that outing, what was the next outing that we rode forward to Georgia from there? I know Debbie went out a couple of times with other people, I guess. But the next
Well,
get together y'all had was in Georgia, right?
no,
Right.
No.
no,
Just,
not after the Jefferson. I mean, we've camped a million times in between there.
Yeah.
But
The next trip,
the next big one was Tribulation Bay again.
Mhm.
We went back to where we've been to Tribulation Bay where we had the all night activity and recorded the gibberish several times. And we think maybe they've gotten used to us. We've had a lot of activity out there since then. But the last time Barbara and Sandy and I went out there, we had something happen again.
well, how about
Well, then, Sandy, you want to talk about it?
go ahead, Sandy?
Might as well. Well, once again, it was a rainy night. And we really didn't think that there was going to be much going on because of the rain. It was kind of hard to hear, for one thing. But me and Debbie was hearing. Barbara was kind of sitting kind of in the doorway of the tent, so she wasn't out up under the canopy like me and Debbie were, so she wasn't able to hear things as well as we could. And sure enough, we heard a moan, good long moan, and me and Debbie, we usually don't say a bunch, we just kind of give each other this look, and the other one knows, okay, we heard the same thing. We had these little battery operated Christmas lights set up behind the tent, and they had gone out. We now know that there was a timer on them, but at the moment we didn't know there was a timer on them. So me and Debbie, it had tampered off raining some, and we had walked back there to get the lights back on and maybe see what had possibly turned them off. But now further investigation, like I said, it was a timer. While we were back there, we heard what she described. Once again, it sounded like a truck motor, a semi-truck motor, like shifting down, like, the sounds they'll make as they're shifting down, going from one gear to the other. But the mystery is, and we probably heard that same shifting sound in the exact same spot, I'm going to say 2 or 3 times, good and loud and clear. And the thing is where we were at was so remote. It was hard to get a regular vehicle back there, and there was no other roads that would have been close enough to us for us to have heard anything remotely like a semi. I mean, a semi couldn't get back there. I just don't see it happening unless it's got super 4-wheel drive power and can push all the bushes out the way. But
And remember that there's lots of trees down out through there.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's trees that you have to go around just to get down, to where we camp.
Right. It's hard to get down there in a regular vehicle, much less we have determined what we were actually hearing was possible deep growls, and they sounded motor-like. Well, after that, Debbie had a tent set up across from me and Barbara's. We were going to tent together, and after her first uh, her first big night with Carrie out there, she decided she was going to sleep with me and Barbara that night. It was just a little bit too active for her liking already. And
I want to interrupt for just a second if I can.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. We between the first time all of this happened at the all nighter, we had different ones of us. We'd been out there. Me and Sandy, I mean, excuse me, me and Barbara and Carrie had been out there several times by ourselves since the all nighter. Me and Henry and Carrie, me and Henry and Barbara, all four of us. We'd been out there several times since the all nighter had happened. And
Mark and I have been there.
you and Mark had been there with us. We took y'all to see the structures and everything that we had found not far from there. The asterisk, two huge uprooted trees stuck up in a tree. I mean, lots of stuff in that area. And several times when the girls and I have been out there, in between these two happenings that Sandy's talking about now and the original happening, we've had several different times have had activity. Nothing, of course, like the all-nighter, and nothing like this night that Sandy's fixing to talk more about, but never since the all-nighter until this time that this happened, and it was almost a year and a half. I had not heard the moans since the all-nighter, and I had not heard that truck motor sound again since the all-nighter. And here, all of a sudden, we've got both of them happening again. So in my mind, I'm thinking, is this the same juvenile or whatever that was harassing us that first night? Am I hearing this again? Is this fixing to be another night like this? And I was thinking, I think I want to sleep in their tent tonight with them. And so I was preparing myself, and luckily I was right.
Now, was this the same time of year as the all-nighter was? The second encounter y'all were having here? No?
This was this past January 2019, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the all-nighter was the middle of September of 2017.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. To go forward, Debbie goes and gets her things and sets her up a little pallet in between Barbara and my bed. I was on a cot, and Barbara was on a cot. And the way her tent's set up is like the center of her tent's taller than the sides. And I had my cot pressed to one side, and Barbara had hers on the other. And Debbie was in the middle on a pallet, and we had a little Mr. Buddy going because not only was it raining, it was freezing. It was absolutely cold out there that night, and we decided it was time to go to bed, so we had all laid down, and Barbara was over there in her cot, and she had covered her whole head and body up with her sleeping bag, and I had turned over, and I was facing the tent, like my face was facing the side of the tent, and the Christmas lights were outside behind the tent, probably I'm going to say 5, 6, 7 foot away from the tent, but they were way low lights, but enough to where you could see any movement that may be coming around you. And Debbie, she was laying there, but I did not know she was actually looking in the same direction I was because I had my back to her. And I was just laying there, closed my eyes for a moment, and I'm like, dang, I can't sleep yet. So I opened my eyes back up. And when I opened my eyes, sure enough, an upright figure walked right by the tent, right on my side. And there was a chair I think we had flipped up, and it bumped the chair. It went on around to the front corner of the tent, right where you couldn't see it. And we had a couple of tubs up under the canopy. And it wasn't coolers, really. It was a tubs like you'd put maybe pots and things like that in, the kind you'd buy at Walmart that you can lift the top off. But it took effort to lift the top off. And whatever it was, it started pulling at these tubs, but it was right in the corner where you couldn't see it doing it. You'd hear it. It made like a pulling sound, like plastic rubbing on gravel, even kind of a little bit, like a I can't. That's about the best way I know. If you took something plastic and rubbed it across some rocks, like a little scraping sound, and then you'd hear something go pop pop, and it was like it try to pull it again, maybe trying to lift the top up even, and pop pop, and it kept on and on. And but anyways, before that, let me back up a little. Whenever I seen the figure walk by, I rolled over and I looked down at Debbie, and I don't know who mouthed what, but one of us mouthed. It's the old lady brain. I'm gonna blame it on that. One of us mouthed, "Did you see that?" And we both were like, "Yeah." And about that time, me and Debbie both, we wanted to see more. We about stick our faces up to the. We did stick our faces up to the actual tent wall, trying to look through it, which was not happening. We couldn't see anything. And it kept pulling and messing with that containers, like it wanted to see what was in it. It was wanting to get it around, but it couldn't quite grab it good enough from the way Barbara's tent was set up. And I completely believe this. It was not no raccoon. A raccoon wouldn't care if we seen it. It would be right there jumping on the container and everything else. This was staying hidden from us. And it kept on. So Debbie wanted to see if Barbara was hearing this as well. So she kind of does a little roll across the tent, and she shimmies up to Barbara, but she wasn't sure what end Barbara was on. She had her whole body covered up. And she pulled down the end, and sure enough, she got the right one where her head was up. She asked Barbara, she said, "Are you," I guess, this is what she told me. She said, "Are you hearing this?" But she kind of mouthed it at her, and Barbara nodded, yes, she was. So that's when we all three started trying to see what we could. Well, this thing, it just kept on. It wanted to get this out. And I think the reason it was so interested in it is because Barbara was in and out of it all day long, trying to taking this out and closing it back, taking that out, closing it back, putting something back. And it probably seen her getting in this continuously, so it thought there probably was something good in there, And after it did this for several minutes, Barbara, she was like, "I'm sick of hearing this mess." And we wasn't expecting it. I know it shocked me. It probably did Debbie too. She said, "Get the hell away from here," or something like that. She said it very forceful. Me and Debbie was like, "Oh my goodness, what's going to happen?"
Yeah, it scared us when she hollered it.
And it stopped it for a few moments, maybe 5 minutes, and then it started right back up, fiddling with this container, trying its best to get its hands on it. It made that dragging sound. And I know, Barbara, you said you thought you also heard it messing in the back of your truck where you had the firewood hidden too, didn't you?
Yes, I could hear it ruffling the tarp. It was raining, and I had the wood under tarp, and I could hear like it was being lifted up and down.
Yeah.
We had also, the way Barbara's tent is, you mentioned the dome shape. On the outside, if you're looking at it, over the door is, shaped like an arch. Well, there is an arch that comes out like a little patio cover, and then it goes down the sides of the door, but it also goes out at an angle towards the front a good distance and creates these two big flaps. And so after I had slithered over there to Barbara's cot and then popped up next to her like a little prairie dog, and she was awake, I decided to stand up because the mesh, that was on top of the tent, of course, was covered up with the rain fly, but the mesh came down in the front on each side of those doors just a little bit. And so I stood up and I was looking out of that mesh, hoping I could see what was ever over there. But whatever was messing with that tub was on the backside of that big flap that came down. And I could see the tub, and the end of that tub was out at the end of that flap. So whatever had been messing with it and then continued messing with it even after this was on the backside of that flap and had to be reaching around with its hand trying to grab hold of it. So that's how we know that whatever it was hiding, because it was hiding back behind that flap. And then I went over to the other side after Barbara had hollered and scared us half to death. And then, a few minutes later, it started back up again. We thought, that sucker's brave. It don't care. But like I said, they were what it's used to us. I mean, we're out there quite a bit, and we think that they're just used to us. And so Barbara stood up on that same side and was looking out, and I had moved over to the left side and was trying to see if I could see anything on that side where the little bitty piece of mesh was, and I couldn't. And so we just sat down on the floor of the tent and talked a little bit, and that's when she was hearing something messing in the back of her truck, and we eventually went back to sleep. But the next morning when we got up, I went out and I got down really low, and I think Barbara was still, she was inside trying to see if she could see anything. Like, I was trying to reenact what we were hearing and what we thought was happening. And I would reach around that flap with my hand and try to pull that tub from way down low. And when I would try to pull it, I mean, that thing was heavy. It wouldn't budge, and my hand would slip. And when it would slip, it hit that lid, and it made that same exact noise that we had heard several times the night before. And so we think that's what it was doing, was pulling it, trying to get it out of there. And it was just so heavy that it couldn't do it with one hand. And there was probably that much that it had pulled away from the tent. And you could see where it had been drugged. But it was an interesting night. So the next night, we decided that we were going to make the inside of the tent look like it had a heater going and it was lit up. So we put a light inside of it and all of that. But then we all slept in my tent directly across from it. And we had a tree right next to my tent, and we put a plot watcher on that tree, put it down low just in case it came back. And I have a mesh screened in front porch that you can zip up. So we zipped that up because it made it a little darker. If it was looking at my tent, it wouldn't be able to see that we had left all of the front doors and windows down, the flaps on them down yay far, so we could see out. And of course, we were dark in our tent, and the plot watcher didn't pick anything up. We didn't hear anything. Of course, we had been up so late the night before with our visitor that we were pretty tired. And I know it was, we had laid in there for quite a while, and we eventually fell asleep. But we didn't hear anything that second night, didn't see anything, and didn't catch anything on the plot watcher. But we did have audio recorders out all nights, and you can hear the stuff messing with, whatever was messing with the tub, and you can hear all sorts of movement, and you can hear the lid popping, and we don't know what it was, but we have our suspicions.
That's the trip. You caught the weird light on the plot watcher too, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably a plane in the sunrise or satellite or something. But
yeah. Well, that's also the night that there were 14 videos on that plot watcher. And the last one, which was this night, all 14 were fine, except this last one. It played for just a short time. And then if you're looking at the screen, from the right side of the screen, this real bright bluish color just starts. You know how in the olden days, in the olden movies, they'd show a reel of film start burning and melting away? Mm-hmm. That's how this reminded me of. It was this blue color was just creeping in, and it gets about midway through, and then it just freezes up and stops, and its film stops. But, just one of them things that make you go, don't know what it was.
I'm sorry.
Well, from here, do we move to Georgia, or is everybody ready for bed?
Go on to Georgia.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
No.
We're going to Georgia.
To Georgia.
Woohoo!
Go
All
dog.
right. Sandy's the one that kind of organized this trip and found y'all's spot. So, Sandy, why don't you start off telling about how you came about finding this location? Well, you don't have to name the location, but just how you found it and the history behind it and all that.
Okay. Actually, me and my husband went camping up in a place probably about 45 miles away, a state park called Vogel. And I have a girlfriend. I'm not going to say her whole name. I haven't got permission to say it, but I got a friend named Sheila that her and her husband are brand new Bigfooters. And they've lived up there, I believe, since September, October this past year. And she and her husband were wanting to show me all this great spot that they had been shown and told about themselves, where they had gone 2 or 3 times, and every time they've gone, they've at least had howls or something. And so I'm like, sure, take me. I'm hunting a place, to bring my sisters camping. And anyways, it's in a non-disclosed location somewhere in northeast Georgia. Okay, it's around Helen, but I'm not going to tell you no more than that. Everybody's seen the pictures. We were near Helen, Georgia.
Yeah.
But anyways, the story is up there, and I tell you, everything I've checked out, I think is pretty much checked out with what they were telling me. It's when you hit the place where we met, it's a good 40-minute trip up this mountain. You have to do it slow, and it's up there. Yeah. There are other places to camp, but there's nobody on top of each other at all. And we were in pretty much the only spot on the entire mountain that you could actually get cell phone signal. So, and we were at pretty much the end of the mountain, and I wanted to grab that spot, so I grabbed it. I went up there the day before everybody was able to arrive. But there's been activity up there for a long time, and I'm going to say it's been about 6 weeks ago, there was a man that was up there camping, and the locals that Sheila and her husband know said that he actually didn't believe in Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and he was up there camping by himself near where we were, and he seen one, and it scared him so bad he up and left. He left everything. Well, this is another interesting thing about this area. About right around the corner, on up a little bit, everything dead ends. You can't go no further. Gates have been closed off. About 2 years ago, they built this really nice park. There is fire rings, picnic tables, and they don't have any nice parks in this mountain. And they actually built one nice park. It was only open maybe a month, maybe. I'm going to just exaggerate. It was open 2 months, but I don't think it was open even that long. And it got closed down really quickly. The DNR will tell you that it was flooded and that there was a bad tornado that tore everything up. And because of this horrible flooding and tornado, they were just not able to open this nice park up anymore. And it even has horse stables on it. I mean, they had even designed it where you could take your horses up there and go camping and horseback riding and all. It's locked. It's closed. And locals are saying, no, that's not what really has happened. They had a lot of people going up there camping that was being frightened away and terrified by the Sasquatch in the area, the Bigfoots in the area. Well, we get up there, and sure enough, I'll let other people speak, but we did go check this park out. It was about a 1.5 mile hike, and when we got there, everything that I was told appeared to be true. I mean, everything looked great. Everything was grown up. I would say a good 2-year growth. And I seen absolutely no reason, none, why this park shouldn't be reopened at all. None. It's a nice park, but it is locked, closed down. Things that make you go, And
We had a very eerie feeling about
it did.
I mean,
It did.
it had nice bathroom area. The doors were just wide open. All the picnic tables that it had out there, you know, that were brand new at the time, they're still there. They were weathered now. There were trees down, you know, and that was it. But the amount of trees that were down, they could have easily gone in there with a chainsaw and cut them up and been out of there and mowed, and the area would have been perfect. Had a really nice building that I guess they used for their equipment to take care of the place. It was still standing. It was perfectly fine. Beautiful place. Thick, thick, thick woods completely surrounding it, and a river that ran down through there. I mean, it was gorgeous. We want to go back and camp in that campground. But, you know, the gate's locked. You can't drive down in there. It is about a 1.5 mile hike in, and then a 1.5 mile back out uphill. But it was very strange. And where we were all camping, it was just a little top of the hill place where you can set your tent up. It's flat, but it's primitive. There's nothing there. You know, we built up a little fire, and then the closest one on the other side on down, there was only one more area, and that was probably between 1 mile to 2 miles down. And then the closest one going down the hill, gosh, that'd have to be down there by the river, and that was several miles down.
Yeah.
Patty, tell us what happened to you that night.
Well, the first night we got there, you know, we didn't get there till like 4 in the morning, and so, you know, we were setting the tents up and everything, and we were pretty exhausted. But the next day, you know, we went out during the day, and we were gone all day, and we decided to come back that night, and we were going to get, you know, supper cooking, and so we had a nice fire going, and it was dark. We were all sitting there, and we started hearing different sounds. Like we would hear kind of across from where the cars were parked, we heard some like growls or grunts, you know, and then we heard some stuff behind us. And so we were just kind of like sitting there listening, you know, everybody just had their recorders on and they were listening. And so we finally, it's probably 1 o'clock in the morning, I guess, we decided we're going to go ahead and go to bed because we were tired from the night before. So we all go to bed, and we get in our tents, and we had set out these little Coleman pop-up lights that are little bitty. We set one to the far left and one to the far right, and then one kind of on one of the cars, so that we had a little bit of light. They weren't real bright, but they were a little bit. And then, of course, we had a nice fire going. So we all go to bed, and, you know, we go to sleep, and her cot was more to the front, and I was to the back, and I was right by the edge of the tent. And right behind me, where we had put the tent up, there was a big trail, like a game trail back there. You know, we found several game trails back there. So, you know, we went to bed and just went to sleep, and then it was a little before 4 o'clock, I'm awakened because I'm a very light sleeper, and I hear something walking behind the tent. And so I told myself, after my first experience where I was terrified and frozen, that I was not going to be scared, and I was going to get up. And so I sat up on my cot, and I listened, and I was just wide awake watching and listening. And I was trying to reach Debbie, and of course she was out of my reach. I grabbed her. All I could get was the end of her comforter, and I pulled her toward me, and she never budged. She was still asleep. And I could hear in the tent next to me, I could hear everybody breathing and snoring and sleeping. And I was just being really quiet, like still as a church mouse, just listening. Well, I could hear whatever it was walk on the side of the tent. And I could tell it was walking, and I just listened. And we had a table set kind of over to in front of Barbara and them's tent where we kept our food, but we didn't have any food. We locked our food up at night, so we just had drinks. Well, I could hear something over there, and I thought, okay, whatever it is looking through our food and stuff over there. So I'm sitting there clear as a bell, and I see this figure come walk right in front of the tent. And it walked very slowly, and I knew exactly where its head hit, which was the top it was like there's a strip on the tent, and it was kind of right there. And it was very thin. It was tall and lanky. It wasn't bulked up. It was thin. But the thing I noticed about it was that its arms were almost to its knees. It was very long arms. And it had just a little bit of like I could even see a tuft of hair. And it walked right in front of me, in front of that tent. And I was just sitting there, and I thought, and at that time we hadn't unzipped the window, so I would have had to unzip the window to look at it. So I just sit there and I watched it go down the side of the tent. And I just sat there for, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes till I heard nothing, and it was dead quiet again. And finally I reached over there and I got a head full of Debbie's hair, and I yanked her hair because I couldn't reach anything else. I'm like, fuck. And she was like, my God. And I said, look, I've been pulling on your comforter. I did whatever. And I finally just got a head of your hair, and I pulled it. So we all, at that time, Debbie and I sit up and we listened for, I don't know, probably another hour. And we were just like, just listening to hear if we heard anything. And by that time it was getting pretty, morning time. So we got up that morning, and I had been told by another researcher who told me about laying out stick symbols. And they said, take some sticks, and they showed me a picture, and I did exactly what they said. And you laid out this little kind of a design with sticks behind our tent. And they said, if they're in the area, I promise you they will change the sticks. They will move them around and make them different. And so I had set those out that night. But when we get up the next morning and I go look behind there.
This was on the second
That was on
night.
the second day. That's right. That was the second morning. They were all changed. They were in a very different configuration than what I had left them. And one of the sticks was totally different because I picked the sticks up and I made them all look exactly the same. And one of the sticks was changed, and it was like a white stick with like barnacle looking things on it. And it was in a sort of like an A figurine sort of. And we thought, well, Lord, that's cool, and that was the next morning. But yeah, that was just, I can't say that I saw it face to face, but I saw a very, very clear outline. And the next night we tested it with the lights, the same lights about the same time, the lights set out in the dark. And Debbie was inside the tent, and I said, you watch me walk and see if you can tell what I am. And she said, I can see you perfectly. I can see every outline of you perfectly. So,
we also, that second night, we set a light behind our tent too.
yes.
Hoping that, because we knew we'd heard so much activity those first two evenings. We knew the area that they were coming from. And we knew that they were back behind our tent because we could hear whoops. That first night, Patty, I believe you said you heard two whoops
I heard
or two
yeah.
something as they were walking off, and
And then
And I know
Sandy
that when,
heard them the night before we ever got there. Remember,
yeah,
she heard them.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's right, while she was waiting on us. But
that's right.
that
And then
sec-
also that night, the second night, we were all sitting around the campfire, just
yeah,
talking and acting normal. And all of a sudden, out of the woods, a rock comes whistling right between Sandy and I and lands right down between us.
it actually hits. Y'all had a bucket sitting
Yeah,
between
there was
y'all,
a bucket
and
in
I
it.
was directly across from you. And I said, as it was coming in, I said, "There's a rock," and it hits that bucket, and at the same time, it's like it had an acorn or something with the rock because you could
Yep.
hear it hit the table, and that acorn or whatever it was hit Stephanie on her foot, and she was next to me, and that rock hit between you and Sandy and went under Sandy's
Yeah.
foot. And I mean, it was that rock was coming in at an angle. It didn't fall out of a tree or anything. It
No,
came
I heard it really
barreling in.
high. You could hear it.
Yeah. And then Sandy and Barbara, the way we had our tent set up there, Sandy has a great big tent. And on the end of it, she has these almost like if it was a house, they'd be French doors.
Yeah.
But it was
I got a
two big,
luxury tent. Yeah.
yeah, two big pieces of mesh that zipped down the middle, and then her doors on the other side. So we had left her mesh French doors where they weren't covered, and I turned my tent at an angle where it was facing my door was facing those mesh doors, and I had my patio, my front little porch coming out, and had it open, and so we could see each other and talk to each other. And that second night, Sandy and Barbara and Stephanie had something thrown on their tent. Y'all talk about that real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were. I was laying there, and mine and Barbara's niece Stephanie, she was camping with us. Well, Stephanie just didn't have a good feeling that night, and bless her heart, I don't think she slept till way early in the morning. Maybe she laid down because every time I'd look up at her, she was sitting up on the cot. I guess maybe I've been camping one time too many. I'd go right back off to sleep. Well, one time she touched my leg, and she lipped to me. I hear something, and about the time she lipped that to me, it sounded like they just had a big handful, maybe two handfuls. It sounded like acorns, little limbs, everything just come barreling on the side of the tent and just rolled down the tent. It's like a ton of stuff. I think you heard it too, didn't you, Barbara?
I heard it too. It was loud.
It was loud.
Stuff
And
ended up on my ceiling, my roof, coming from
yeah,
y'all's tent. It came all the way across y'all's roof and landed on the top part of my porch cover.
Yeah.
yeah. And didn't you see, Barbara, didn't you see some dirt on the top of my tent the next morning?
Mhm.
Didn't you see dirt, Barbara? Like some dirt on the top of the tent the next morning?
Yes, there was dirt on the tent, but before that happened, I was laying there and Stephanie had shook my foot to wake me up. And I was laying there listening, and you could hear the wind chimes that we had hung up. They were just lightly blowing. Well, all of a sudden, these chimes just start going thump, thump, thump. And
I
it
heard
was
that.
obvious it wasn't just the wind blowing them. And the night before, we were also dead dog tired. We were, all five of us was singing the blues with our snoring. And it had no doubt we were asleep. And it felt very comfortable coming into camp. But that night it wasn't quite so sure because we were kind of taking turns snoring. And I think once I started hearing the chimes, Sandy and Stephanie and I, we started trying to whisper each other, but we just can't be quiet enough and still hear each other. And I think it was hearing us move around in the tent. So it just grabs a handful of something and just chomps it at us. And Sandy starts flashing her flashlight, and Debbie's trying to wake her
Yeah,
up.
Wake up!
she was trying to send Morse code or something over there to me. But it worked. It worked. I woke up and I
it
sat up
worked.
and
I could hear y'all, and you were like going, Patty, Patty.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was pretty. That was loud when it threw that. Whatever it was loud. It woke me up immediately.
Yeah.
Well, it was quite a night that night too, but it
was an
wasn't
eventful
sure
weekend.
enough to come in camp like it did the night before, because it wasn't quite sure that we were asleep.
Yeah. I'm ready to go back.
and I had that second night I had set out 3 cameras. I had 3 GoPros set up. Just, they're little, they're not as noticeable. Of course, nothing comes in, to the front that night. But it was that night that something messed with Patty's little glyph or whatever she had set out back. So that's the night that it played and left us what looked like 2 A's and changed out the sticks. I believe it was 2 sticks that was actually changed out that weren't original to the original glyph.
We got pictures on the video that we played earlier, and one thing that I want to say is, if you've got questions about any of this stuff, like the headless rabbit and other things that we showed on the video, put them in the comment section, because Debbie will come on there and she'll answer your question. So if you saw things on the video or a part of their stories, then just put them in the comment section. And we want to remind everybody to hit that like button. Hit that like button right now. Tell them, Debbie.
Yeah, hit that like button, subscribe, and ding that little bell so you'll get notifications every time Beast TV puts up a new video.
Man.
And let me say something real quick. I know that this has been a long recording, and I haven't been watching the live chat, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But if you want to send a friend request to any of us girls, or send us a private message asking the questions that I have not been able to answer, one of us will answer you. Just feel free to message us.
Yeah.
Yep, we will.
And unfortunately, y'all don't have a public Facebook or YouTube.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't really have time to mess with all that. We're too busy in the woods, and we go out all the, we go out
We'd
as much
rather
as
go
we can.
camping.
Yeah,
Right.
but I
Well,
mean, y'all can.
I'm going to let y'all in on a secret. They don't want y'all there. And you're not getting a hint.
I think they like
They
us,
do want
actually.
us there, Larry, because we're much more interesting than y'all are. We're female.
That's probably true.
They're not scared of us.
No, they're not scared of us. They're intrigued by us.
I got a feeling they're not scared of us either.
No, probably not.
They may be more attractive.
Scared of much.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah. No, but
Well,
that was a really interesting location in Georgia. When we got there Friday morning about 4 o'clock, we were just kind of standing around, and we probably hadn't been out there 10 minutes, and we started hearing the motor grouse that night.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And people say to me, "Oh, somebody was playing a joke on y'all." Well, they went to a whole lot of trouble, because it was almost an hour drive to get to the top of that mountain, and that was one way up and one way down.
Well, there wasn't nobody up there.
No, there was nobody up there, but people always want to say, "Oh, somebody knew y'all were there." Well, no, I don't think they did.
No.
We don't ever tell anybody where the location is.
Exactly where we're at. No.
We took Mark and Larry are the only ones that have been out to one of our locations.
We've got them pinned.
I really think that abandoned campground would be an awesome place. We'd have to hike in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. But boy, was it creepy.
It was. It was great.
It was like a really good movie.
I'd want something to have a quick getaway with for sure.
Yeah, for sure, because there's no quick getaways. You have to walk a mile and a half to get out.
Uphill.
Yeah, for real. It is uphill, really.
Uphill both ways.
Yes.
Larry, I'll have to put me in a wheelbarrow.
We were huffing and puffing by the time we got back to the top.
Well, I do carry your stuff for you occasionally, so.
I'm a wuss.
Well, we've only been in this for 2 hours. I know y'all still have more stories to tell and things, and we appreciate y'all coming on here and sharing them with us. What do y'all got on the docket next? Y'all speaking at any conferences? Got any trips planned without going into location? What's going on with y'all?
Well, October we have the conference in Jefferson. We're not really speaking, but we'll be there as vendors. And then I'm not sure, we do have one. What is that?
Well, we'll be
Southeast Texas.
Yeah, we're speakers at the Southeast Texas conference in May, and then we're also in October. We're going to be recording with Carrie Arnold on Bigfoot Odyssey, and we'll be on that. But then I know that there's the Outlaw outing coming up in October, so I'll be with that. And we've got some trips planned.
Well, winters usually are better busy, sisters. We'll be out more in the winter
enjoy
time
the
than
cold.
any other time.
We like the cold weather.
But we camp year round.
We do, but the ticks do not like me, so I'm not a big summer person. Or should I say the ticks do like me?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like Henry did watch the show, so maybe she's feeling a little bit better. And hopefully next time y'all are on, that Henry will join us. Hopefully.
I hope so. I hope you're feeling better, Henry.
Yeah.
Get well, Henry. We love you.
We love you.
All right, guys, I think we're going to start wrapping this up. Mark. Hello, Mark.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that if you enjoyed watching the sisters tonight, one of the sisters, Debbie Jones, is Larry and myself's handler, and she does our scheduling. So if there's a topic that you want to hear us talk about, or a guest that you would like to have on, then just put it down in the comment section, and Debbie will see it, and she will get in touch with you. And she is persistent. I like to call her a bulldog, because if she get her mind on something, she's going after it. And so if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd be honored if you would subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit the like button. And we want to thank all of our faithful followers that have subscribed to us. You do not know how much we appreciate y'all. Back at you, Larry.
Well, we appreciate y'all joining us tonight. And I believe the only Sisters of the Moon video that's out there is on the Sawdust Beast channel. So if y'all want to look at any of the locations that they had their encounter at Tribulation Bay, I believe that's on there. So go check that out.
And I will put it right there, so it will be easy for you to find.
Check out my channel, Beast of the Woods. Remember to check out Bigfoot Odyssey. We've got a GoFundMe going for the big outing we're going on. It's going to be a 12-hour documentary, I believe Carrie said. And our buddy Cam at Dixie Cryptid. Check all those out. Anything else, ladies?
Thank
No.
you.
Thank you.
for this. We appreciate it.
I
All right,
enjoyed
y'all have a good night, and thanks for joining us.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye.
This has been a Sawdust production.
Mama had to do my show. I couldn't let y'all out. Y'all were just like little poopies. Poopy, poopy, poopy. Okay.